Okay, abusua ɛyɛ former EC boss your friend of Charlotte Osei aba abɔnten aba abɛ expose NPP amanyɔkuo no ɛkwan bi a ɔmode ne faa so a kyɛ sɛ nyame nko a nka ɔhwere ne nkwa anaasɛ threat bi a ɛbaa ne so ɔne ne family members all because time na ɛkyɛ sɛ ɔyɛ electoral commission NPP foɔ no na omobo enjo so I just say omoye ya yedi removing from office and after say you removing from office na abusuya NPP empanyimfo ni bi bo pa senka omo kwa kopa ija ato Charlotte Osei na abusuya fi na ono ankasa no omo aye edeni juma ankasa abusuya Charlotte Osei ababonten ababe expose NPP leaders over a removal process no na cost no traitor or more threat no mommy corner young conco tea and smart on one casa edituja unsubscribe subscribe like and I share my afro front so answer into me and can be a Ghana politics avenue so madam I say
2025 Democracy Dialogues in Accra, organized by the Goodluck Jonathan Foundation. That's the former president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Charlotte Osei described her experience as both difficult and deeply personal during that period as the chair of the Electoral Commission. Take a look.
I wouldn't say the phone calls and the pressure were the issues. Most people know I'm quite stubborn. So the kind of calls you think I received, I probably did not even receive because they knew I would not be amenable. The cost was really on a very personal level, attacks on my family, concerns about the safety of my children and my wider family. There were a lot of lies, and so the whole fabric of the family was affected. It's either they were worrying for themselves or they were constantly worrying about your own safety. My dad was still alive at the time, so that created other challenges. There was a time that a political party mob surrounded my dad's house, that they were going to burn it down because of actions they felt I had taken. So those were the kinds of personal pressures that as a woman, as a mother, as a daughter, as a wife, as a sister, you have to deal with. So those ones were more worrying than the pressure of people calling you to say, do this. I mean, if they say do it and it's not in line with the law, it's an easy answer. I wouldn't do it because it's not in line with the law. So that didn't really bother me too much.
That's troubling to say the least. That's Madam Charlotte Osei, the former chairperson of the Electoral Commission of the Republic of Ghana. And thankfully, I've been joined on Zoom by Professor Bawumia Jimendia. He's a governance expert, former senior advisor to the United Nations on governance matters. He's joining us on Zoom right now. Professor Bawumia Jimendia, appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us here on Ghana Tonight. And you were there at this Democracy Dialogues 2025, organized by the Goodluck Jonathan Foundation. That was yesterday, and we sat on the same row. You hear Charlotte Osei make that concern about how political actors sometimes can take their passion to a different level, and the threats that she was exposed to as a result of doing her work as chair of the Electoral Commission, to the extent of facing threats with her family as well. A late father, political party supporters surrounded his house, threatening to burn it down. Concerning, to say the least, is it not?
Absolutely. It's a very critical point about elections, not only in Ghana, but I think across the African continent. So far, if you look at elections across the continent, all the time we do hear of incidents of violence in different ways, some serious, some not so serious, attempts to subvert the integrity of the process, many things. So elections being critical to democratic practice, I think needs to be sanitized in such a way that outcomes will not be contested by competing political parties. So I do agree that elections require special attention in all emerging democracies.
And it's a very, very important issue that you break about what has been. And Prof, if you could kindly reposition for me, because there's a little break in the connection to you, so that we have some clarity to the point that you were making. But then you reference the safety and the integrity of elections. It's an important point because Madam Charlotte Osei made reference and in fact raised concern about what in her view the continental bodies, the ECOWAS and the AU can do and should do to protect the integrity of elections. And this is it. She indicated that one, in her view, ECOWAS and the AU hide behind quiet diplomacy in the face of flawed elections and constitutional manipulation, while showing greater boldness in condemning military takeovers. I mean, this is one that has to be paid attention to. I ask this because you have been a member of a number of these ECOWAS groups that go to monitor elections, election observers, AU election observers, ECOWAS election observers. You've been part of them. What else has to be done beyond the quiet diplomacy that we see the sub-regional and the continental body engage in when it comes to elections?
I have participated in international election observation for some time, not recently, but between 1997 and 2008. I've been to at least 6 or 7 or 8 African countries, and I've seen different ways African countries have these elections. And I'm also a participant in international observer groups, not the ECOWAS, but I have participated in the Commonwealth group, at least 2 big countries. Then this organization in Washington, NDI, have been with them to observe elections in about 3 or so other African countries. But let me say that the way I see it, what is of prime importance to these observer groups is to ensure peace in these countries where we go to observe. So that even at times when there's evidence of gross violations of the electoral rules, seldom will you have these groups coming out boldly to condemn them for the sake of not, provoking violence or provoking the anger of government, opposition parties, or wherever. So they are always acting in a kind of a moderate way in order not to. Because certainly, I'm not sure of any African country where electoral conduct has not been, at least there have not been any attempts to manipulate or to influence in one way or the other. So the priority of election observers, the groups like you mentioned, ECOWAS, AU, as well as the Commonwealth, which I used to work with them, I think that is the truth from my perspective. But having said that, it's also important that these groups find a way to help these countries to overcome the challenges of elections, not merely to wait and go on observe and make pronouncements, because they know too well the deficits in electoral systems in most African countries. Look, when I was in Cameroon back in August 2004, I was sent by the Commonwealth. The system in place in Cameroon is the strangest system I've ever seen. But I was sent by the Commonwealth to go support they call it National Election Observatory, to train the officers and help them to develop some models for deployment of observers and all. But looking at the electoral system, you can understand why since 1982, President Biya has been in power till today. When I went there, he was just around 73, 74 years old. As we speak, the man is 93 years old and he's seeking re-election this coming October. So ask yourself, how is it possible for this man to win every single election in the country? It's all because of the system they have created. So if I'm interested in going to help Cameroon, I'll be interested in helping them to recraft the system. Of course, if the government will allow them. You see, so I'm citing this example to illustrate how problematic some of these electoral systems are. That's one thing. The other thing, though, having said that, it's also important to understand that the presence of election observers by itself is very crucial for certain countries to have discipline. When I was in Zimbabwe, May 2000, that is when the so-called veterans, the militants were beating and killing the so-called white farmers. Whenever we appeared on any farm where there was that trouble, everything was quiet. And even those we met who were so-called the veterans, they would come and say, oh, no, we are not beating anybody. They were pleading. So it also taught me that, in fact, the presence of international observers in certain countries, perhaps not in all countries, in certain countries do help to bring some peace and calm to these areas. So I think, one, it depends on the political system or the electoral system in place. And then, of course, the people and their parties and their politicians have also played the game. But I will not rule out the importance of these observers, but I do agree with Madame Osei, that in fact, these observer groups, especially the ECOWAS and the AU, should begin to focus more on the systems that are in place and engage the political parties and their leaders prior to the elections for a certain basic understanding to occur. I know in Ghana, for instance, during Charles' tenure, ECOWAS came and met the party, their leadership and all. I know, and even forcing them to sign a peace agreement as if that would prevent violence or conflict or anything of the sort. But these are some of the efforts that these groups make to ensure that there is peace during and after the elections.
I see. And you reference Cameroon. That Cameroon, you say, is the strangest experience you've ever had as an election observer. Many who have expressed very real concerns about what is happening. But that country is not alone when you talk about those strange things you experienced. Is democracy under threat on the continent with what we are seeing now?
I did listen to some of the comments our president made at the Democracy Dialogue, which was hosted by a Good Luck's Foundation from Nigeria. And I can understand why the president would say that. Why he say it can collapse if you don't take care. Because, look, even a country like the United States, that used to be the model for most of us, today is under more serious threat than even democracies in African countries. The reason why perhaps you are concerned is that, at least from my perspective, we started on the wrong footing. We embraced democracy without question. Our forefathers who fought for our independence and embraced democratic practice immediately did not examine the whole system in terms of its practice to determine what needs to be changed, modified, and what needs to be adapted or adopted, and so on and so forth. We just took it and embraced it. If I look at the challenges of democracy today, I'm quick to say, look, perhaps we missed certain fundamental issues here. When you talk of a system that is itself divisive, especially if you adopt democratic practice and decide to create within it the practice to be exclusive, that is to say, a winner takes all. Knowing too well the kind of history, the kind of culture and traditions that you have, and with no regard to that, and the people that you are going to rule over, then democracy is going to deepen the divisions that we have. So for me, when in our country, our dear country, when we are struggling to find responses to certain political challenges and all, I say, look at the system we have. You cannot bring to this a society such as Ghana, especially most South African countries, DRC and others that have had serious conflicts, where you solve the problem, by imposing democracy, which says, if I win 51, everything is mine, and you have to go to be in opposition for 4 or 5 years. I mean, that is not, for me, it doesn't make sense, given the conditions and the circumstances of this particular country. So in the same way, I'm saying that perhaps right from the beginning, if we have the presence of mind, we could have decided to examine, put democratic practice into critical kind of analysis without needlessly going to the West and adapting their practice and just using them in a situation where things are different. And by the way, let me be clear. I am not doubting the relevance of democracy. I'm here talking about democratic practice, which is different from democratic principles. The principles are universal. The practice must be according to your circumstance, your history, your culture, and everything. Today, as we speak, everybody is beginning to see, with the upsurge of traditional leadership in this country, that in itself could be a threat to the way we practice our democracy. Democracy that centralizes power at the center and make all the other places dependent almost exclusively on the center. That is to say, having such a strong executive that even in the districts, nothing functions without, getting something from the central government. So I think we have to be looking at these things to ensure that when we talk of democratic practice in its true sense, we should be looking at the grassroots democracy where people in their own localities will have the capacity to determine to a large extent their own destiny in terms of their development and other things, rather than everything being cooked in Accra and then being dished out to all parts of the country. That's why people are now so dependent on the central government. So dependent.
Indeed.
President Mahama, during his first tenure, went to Western region somewhere. I remember this vividly because for me it was very striking. On his tour, somewhere in the Western region, as you know, at the Durban, the chief will stand up and plead with the president what they need and all. What this Omahine told the president, President Mahama, this is during his first tenure, was that, Mr. President, my people, even where we can go and leave our leg, that is to say toilet, like the Kujaya night, that town was asking a president of the republic for what? For toilets. And the president cleverly told the Omahine, Nana, this one, they go to your district assembly. They are responsible for that. But the fact that the chief asked the president for toilet meant that the district assembly has not been providing that for them. You see, so if the president means it, then it means that we have to take decentralization seriously so that people in their own localities can be empowered to take charge of their development rather than falling on the central government all the time for their progress.
And I do appreciate
These
this.
are some of the deficits I find in democracy,
the kind of system that we're practicing. I do appreciate this. Very important issues that you raised there. Professor Bawumia Agyeman-Duah, thank you so much. Thank you for doing this diagnosis for us and the attention that needs to be paid to the deficiencies that you identified in there. Fortunately, we're in the process of reviewing our constitution as whether these issues you identified will find some attention in them is one that we'll see how the coming days will play out. Thank you. He is a governance expert and also a former United Nations senior advisor on governance. Professor Bawumia.
So Charlotte Osei and natě&Set or this are and some to ja and also subscribe like and I share my Akuffo so and into me and Kabiaha Ghana politics avenue so Madam Osei.